Welcome to the R&L Revolution Nothing Less show. Today is February 2nd, 2023, and this is our 133rd episode. My name is Andy Zee. I'm the host of the show, coming to you from Los Angeles, California.
And my name is Sunsara Taylor. I'm the co-host of the Revolution Nothing Less show.
February is marked as Black History Month, with the history of black people being brought to this continent in chains, enslaved for over 2 centuries, upon which the wealth of this country was accumulated, with the whole history of black people in this country down to today marked by the most vicious exploitation, discrimination, and oppression, along with the heroic struggle from the slave rebellions, the heroism of freedom fighters such as Nat Turner to the Black Panther Party in the 1960s, along with the creation of deep in liberating music, art, and literature. It is very fitting that we mark this year's Black History Month with what we bring on this show, revolution, nothing less, and all the more so, and painfully so, with the murder of Tyre Nichols at the hands of the Memphis police, weighing heavily on the hearts of black people and all people who hate oppression and yearn for a just world.
This show, the Revolution Nothing Less show, is about an actual revolution to overthrow the system that we live under, the system of capitalism imperialism, a system which exploits and oppresses humanity here and all around the world. And this revolution will clear the ground to bring into being a radically different and a far better society on the road to emancipation for humanity everywhere. Our show draws its name, and we take our guidance from the work and the leadership of the revolutionary leader Bob Avakian. We are going to introduce this first show of Black History Month 2023 with an excerpt from Bob Avakian from his 2018 speech called Why We Need an Actual Revolution and How We Can Really Make Revolution, that lets you know what this revolution is all about. From there, we're going to bring you a segment with Zee Noche Diaz, the national spokesperson for the Revolution Clubs. He'll be in conversation with Andy, speaking about the brutal, the heartless, and heartbreaking murder of Tyre Nichols by the Memphis police, how we need to understand this and what needs to be done about this. After that, Rafael Kadaris will address the recent ban on high school advanced placement African American studies classes by the fascist governor of Florida, Ron DeSantis. This ban includes outlawing the teaching of the brutal history and reality of white supremacy in America. And finally, we'll close the show out with a beautiful message of inspiration and a challenge to people of conscience everywhere to stand with the political prisoners in Iran who are heroically rising up.
Today's program honors Tyre Nichols' memory through our determination to make revolution for the emancipation of all humanity. So let's watch the opening of Why We Need an Actual Revolution and How We Could Really Make Revolution by Bob Avakian in 2018.
Why we need an actual revolution and how we can really make revolution. This talk will elaborate on and go more deeply into what is set forth in How We Can Win, How We Can Really Make Revolution, a statement from the Revolutionary Communist Party, which provides a crucial guideline that should be taken up and acted on by everyone who hungers for and wants to be part of bringing into being a world without the horrors to which the masses of humanity are continually subjected. In line with that, in speaking here about what we need to be doing, I am not just talking about those of us who are already involved, but all those who need to become part of this revolution. This will consist of 2 parts. 1, only an actual revolution can bring about the fundamental change that is needed. And 2, how we can really make revolution. So let's get right into it. 1, only an actual revolution can bring about the fundamental change that is needed. In 2012, in Revolution Nothing Less, I talked about the outrageous murder of Ramarley Graham earlier that same year, shot down in his own house in the Bronx by the New York City police. He was only 18 years old. Do I have to tell you what race he was? His mother kept saying, "This has to stop." And his father repeated over and over, "Why did they kill my son? Why did they kill my son?" New York cops then loudly rallied around their fellow pig who murdered Ramarley in cold blood, viciously taunting Ramarley's family and loved ones, demonstrating yet one more time the ugly truth that in the way this country has been built, and for the powers that be in this country, the humanity of black people has never counted for anything. They have never been valued as human beings, but only as things to be exploited, oppressed, and repressed. 6 years later, and with cold-blooded murders by police continuing in an unbroken chain, I will say again now what I said then. How many more times does this have to happen? How many more times do the tears and the cries of anguish and anger have to pour forth from the wounded hearts of people? How many more times, when another of these outrageous murders is perpetrated by the police, do we have to hear those words that pour gasoline on the already burning wounds? Justifiable homicide, justified use of force by police. How many more? Ramarley Graham, Nicholas Hayward Jr., Tamir Rice, Eric Garner, Darius Pinex, Oscar Grant, Manuel Diaz, Joel Acevedo, Laquan McDonald, Ayanna Stanley Jones, Sandra Bland, Jack Sun, Rennie Davis, Michael Brown, Freddie Gray, Maurice Granton, Harith Augustus. The list goes on and on and on. Thousands and thousands, especially Black and Latino and Native American. If this were the only thing wrong with this system, it would be more than enough reason to sweep it off the earth. But this is only part of the intolerable outrages that are continually perpetrated by this system and that cause so much unnecessary suffering for the masses of humanity. So let's go back to why and what it will take to make all the outrages really stop. Why are Black people, Latinos, and Native Americans subjected to genocidal persecution, mass incarceration, police brutality, and murder? Why is there the patriarchal degradation, dehumanization, and subjugation of all women everywhere, and oppression based on gender or sexual orientation? Why are there wars of empire, armies of occupation, and crimes against humanity? Why is there the demonization, criminalization, and deportations of immigrants and the militarization of the border? Why is the environment of our planet being destroyed? These are what we call the 5 stops, deep and defining contradictions of this system, with all the destruction and suffering they cause, which must be protested and resisted in a powerful way, with a real determination to stop them, but which can only be finally ended by putting an end to this system itself. Why, along with all this, do we live in a world where large parts of humanity live in stark poverty, with 2.3 billion people lacking even rudimentary toilets or latrines, and huge numbers suffering from preventable diseases, with millions of children dying every year from these diseases and from starvation, while 150 million children in the world are forced to engage in ruthlessly exploited child labor, and the whole world economy rests on a vast network of sweatshops, employing large numbers of women who are regularly subjected to sexual harassment and assault. A world where 65 million refugees have been displaced by war, poverty, persecution, and the effects of global warming. Why is this the state of humanity? There is one fundamental reason. The basic nature of the system of capitalism, imperialism that we live under, and the way, because of its very nature, it continually perpetrates and perpetuates horror after horror. And in fundamental terms, we have two choices. Either live with all this and condemn future generations to the same, or worse, if they have a future at all, or make revolution.
That was Bob Avakian from his 2018 speech, Why We Need an Actual Revolution and How We Could Really Make Revolution. Now, Bob Avakian is a leader that you need to get to know very deeply. He became a revolutionary in the 1960s. He worked and struggled against the Vietnam War, the unjust Vietnam War. At the time, he worked very closely as well with the Black Panther Party in their radical, most revolutionary days. And he continued on that path. He became a revolutionary communist and went on to forge a whole new framework for human emancipation, what we call the New Communism. Now, last fall, Andy and I had the opportunity to sit down with Bob Avakian and conduct 3 interviews with him, up close and personal, for this show, the Revolution Nothing Less show. These interviews are extraordinary. They're deep. You need to watch these. You get a sense of this leader, this person, Bob Avakian. You get a sense of his life, what shaped him personally, politically, in terms of the arts, in terms of his scientific approach. And at the same time, you get invited into understanding this world very deeply, how it came to be, why it is the way it is, and how it could be radically changed. Why we need an actual revolution, the strategy to make this revolution, the scientific method and approach to make it real, and the generosity of spirit that he embodies and that the world he and we are fighting for. So after you're done watching this show, you need to watch these interviews. They're on our channel, and you need to get to know this leader.
To further set the stage, Sunsara, for the rest of the show and for Black History Month, we're going to play the introduction to Bob Avakian's article, Racial Oppression Can Be Ended, but Not Under This System. This was illustrated by the RNL team. And after we play that, we're going to go to my conversation with Noche Diaz about the murder of Tyre Nichols.
Why is this terror and murder necessary for this system in order to ensure its order and its ongoing functioning? The answer is that from the beginning of this country, white supremacy has been poured into the foundation and built into the institutions and the ongoing functioning of this system. Specifically with regard to Black people, the centuries of oppression they have suffered, from slavery days to the days of Jim Crow segregation and Ku Klux Klan terror, to the present time with the continuing systematic discrimination against Black people in every part of society, employment, housing, education, healthcare, and on and on. All this has resulted in a situation where masses of Black people today, and in particular youth, have been robbed of a means for a decent life, with many maintained in conditions of desperate poverty and deprivation. This, again, is not simply because those who are in the seats of power and deciding government policy are racist, though that is true of most of them. It is fundamentally because of the nature of the system itself and the historically evolved requirements and dynamics of this system of capitalism imperialism. Now that is a big mouthful. The nature of the system itself and the historically evolved requirements and dynamics of this system of capitalism imperialism. So let's break it down. This country was founded on the enslavement of masses of African people, as well as the genocidal subjugation of Native Americans and theft of their land. And its further development involved the conquest of huge parts of Mexico, reducing people of Mexican origin to second-class status as well. This required the propagation of racism to justify all the horrific oppression. Then, when the Civil War broke out over the question of slavery, and even when slavery was abolished as a result of that Civil War, given that white supremacy had been and remained such a crucial part of the glue holding the country together, the only way to put it back together on the foundation of the capitalist system was to once again forcefully assert white supremacy. That is why, very soon after the end of the Civil War, black people were subjected to the system of Jim Crow segregation, backed up by systematic terror punctuated by repeated lynchings, while the genocidal aggression against and theft of the land of Native Americans was stepped up, and immigrants from Mexico were subjected to ongoing discrimination and violence by the enforcers of this system.
Police have released that video showing officers beating Tyre Nichols. The video is every bit as horrific as Memphis officials had warned it would be. Body camera footage and video from surveillance cameras from January 7th show officers hitting, kicking, and pepper spraying Tyre Nichols. In the video, 29-year-old Tyre Nichols can be heard calling out for his mother. Nichols was hospitalized and then died 3 days later.
In that video, you can see he was already on the ground after he was pulled over at that other location. The officers in the video repeatedly punch and kick Nichols over and over again in the video. At one point, you can see they stand him up, they hold his hands behind his back and begin punching and hitting him and wrestle him down to the ground again.
Tyre Nichols was a loving father to his 4-year-old son. He was the youngest of 4 children, the baby of his family. He worked for Federal Express, but he lived for his passions, skateboarding, photography, and beautiful sunsets. He was an inspiration to those who knew him, and I will let those who loved him most tell you in their own words.
He didn't have a negative bone in his body, like at all. Energetic, outgoing, funny, goofy, always had a smile on his face.
My son, I know everybody say mother say they had a good son, everybody's son is good, but my son, he actually was a good boy. He had my name tattooed on his arm, and that made me proud, because most kids don't put their mom's name, but he did. My son was a beautiful soul, and he touched everyone.
Tyre brought something out of me to make me feel like, hey, you don't have to do that. You don't have to follow a trend to be loved. You can be yourself. You can skateboard, you can ice hockey, you can do whatever that you want to do.
He was the kind of guy when you come in the door, you can't walk past him without getting a hug.
With a bad concussion, plus you hit 4 times, but it hit your spine. Hair line way down, then you wheelchair bound. Never mind that now, you lucky to be alive.
I just watched the 4 videos that were released by the Memphis police. The 4 videos that depict the brutal savagery of the cops who murdered Tyre Nichols. The whole time watching, I could hear in the back of my head the pain and the cracking in the voice of Rovon Wells, the mother of Tyre Nichols, this morning at a press conference when she spoke of her loss. My heart, obviously, is with her and the family. But look at these videos. Look at this unmitigated savagery. Everyone who acts in rebellion, has been in the streets, or who will be in the streets, is righteous to do so. But we have to ask the question, how long are we going to watch this go on and on? I've spoken recently about how to understand these murders and what to do about it, and the need for a real revolution to put an end to this. Bob Avakian, who I follow, has a real strategy for how we can make this revolution and build a new society where never again would the people entrusted to protect and serve be allowed to get away with this kind of monstrosity. But you are going to have to ask yourself, how long are you willing to put up with this?
So I'm here with Noche Diaz, who you just saw. Noche is a national spokesperson for the Revolution Clubs. Noche, welcome back to the Revolution Nothing Less show.
This is where we need to be.
It is, and you, it's quite moving that this, when I saw that video you made right after the videos had aired of the brutal, wanton killing of Tyre Nichols by the Memphis police. In that video, Noche, you asked two questions, how long will this go on? And how long will people put up with this and settle for anything less than revolution? So why did you pose these two questions?
Well, those were the two questions that had been jumping out at me when watching those videos. How long is this going to go on? And you cannot help but feel the sense of responsibility when you're watching that, of what are you going to do while this is going on in this society? The level of horrificness in these videos has to be confronted. The crimes of each of the cops involved, each of them, and the severity of them needs to be confronted when talking about what needs to be done about this, but also the feeling you get when you watch that and you know what's coming and you know how the story ends and you've seen too many things like this and you know how many people have seen this go on and on. The questions that jumped out, how long and when are people going to stop putting up with anything less and what's going to really put an end to this? So that's what jumped out to me, and that's what I feel like a lot of people need to be confronted with right now. As these videos have come out, people have begun to see that, or some people have begun to turn away, or or telling themselves, I've seen it all before, whatever it is, or there's nothing we can do, so why watch it? No, watch it. Confront those questions and pursue the answers. And that's why we're here on this show today.
I think in many different forms, what you just posed comes up for just a lot of people. When we opened with the video of what kind of person Tyre was, you see him skating, you hear about his life, and then you mention the videos, and you see the very opening video, which people somewhat pass by, when they just come up on him and treat him like he had just done the most heinous act ever. They never identify anything. They just treat him with such utter fucking disrespect. And he's trying to comply. And they just go after him. And I think this has raised a question for a lot of people. And I know this actually from the Revolution Clubs in Chicago, where people then started telling how they had been done the same way, but didn't end up in the same place that Tyre ended up. I just think we just can take another second here, another minute or two, just to talk about that, a question that you've brought up and posed for people. And I want to pause on it. How long does this go on?
You're right to bring people back to how this incident opens up with this brutality. And for people to really confront that. And like you said, in Chicago, when people were watching this together, and part of what you're forced to confront is not just how horrific what they did to Tyre was, but how this is almost an inevitable outcome, almost a logical conclusion of what is done every single day, all the time, everywhere in this country. And at every point along the way in this video, you can pause it and pose the same thing. And this goes on every day all over this country. And everyone who's watched this and felt that, you need to be speaking up the way those comrades in Chicago were and telling these stories, because as inevitable as it seems and as it feels when you're watching that video about where this is going to end, it is not inevitable that this keeps on going on and on and on. It happens because we live under a system that needs their police doing that, and we can put an end to this system. Again, watch those videos. Look at how they pounce on Tyre. Totally lacking any humanity in the eyes of these police was this young black man. Because in this country, for millions and millions of people, especially black, as well as Latino and other people of color, but especially black people throughout the whole history of this country, their humanity has never counted for anything more than as things to be used up, things to be making profit for some other class of people. And today they don't even have a way to make a profit off of them, so there's millions of people they've just discarded into prisons or having them set up in situations where they're killing each other in the streets, or else they're killed off by the police on top of that. And generation after generation, this has gone on for some 50 odd years, and they've not been able to cover it up anymore. It is becoming sharper and sharper to everyone that talking about this cop or that cop or something small that can deal with this is not going to cut it. And so people are scrambling. The people who run this are trying to figure out a way to get people back into accepting it or to pull it all back together and say that they have some answer, but they have no answers. They have nothing, no way under their system that they can do without this kind of murder and brutality. And this is not only a condemnation and a declaration of the bankruptcy of this system and a call to everyone who has any humanity left in them to get rid of this system. It also is a light on the possibility that exists in these times when this is so sharply posed, when there is no answers being brought forward by any of the people in power to actually go and wake people up and shake people up and confront them with that question of how long are you going to be part of putting up with anything less than revolution and getting rid of this system once and for all.
Yeah, so Noche, you spoke about use the word system, and systems being bandied about a lot now. One of the things that's really hung up a lot of people, confused a lot of people, upset people, is that this was all black cops doing this. And on top of that, as you pointed out in your statement, they had body cams, there was sensitivity training, all these other reforms, and still this horrific, brutal murder took place by these police. And so people are going to the policing system is the problem, but really, what system is responsible for the murder of Tyre Nichols and thousands of other people? Is it the policing system, or is it the system that this policing actually serves?
It is the system that these police serve. And people can go to the article for more, but also there's long answers and short answers, and Bob Avakian gets into both of them. And I do want to read for people something I think that's, very important in the book Basics, from the talks and writings of Bob Avakian, especially at this time when the reality and the ugliness of what these police do is hanging out, to not let them get away with covering it up by just talking about the culture of policing or the system of policing. And this quote from Basics cuts right through a lot of that. Bob Avakian says, "The role of the police is not to serve and protect the people. It is to serve and protect the system that rules over the people. To enforce the relations of exploitation and oppression, the conditions of poverty, misery, and degradation into which the system has cast people and is determined to keep people in. The law and order that the police are about, with all their brutality and murder, is the law and order that enforces all this oppression and madness." Again, he emphasizes and walks you through there. The system of capitalism, imperialism, the system of exploitation and oppression is what these police serve and protect, and it is why they do it the way that they do.
That book, Basics, is something that everybody who's agonizing about this situation should get into. It's available online at revcom.us, so you can get a copy. It's available as an ebook. Bob Avakian has called this a toxic combination. This systemic, historically evolved, the segregation, the discrimination, the white supremacy, and how it's woven together with the capitalist system, a system that depends on exploiting people and sets people against each other in every realm. People need to get into this in depth. There's really you could spend an hour, 2 hours, and actually a whole course in why this is so. But we have a tremendous resource that in 2020, when there was the beautiful rising in opposition to the brutal, wanton, again, police murder of George Floyd, Bob Avakian wrote a series of articles. This is in 2020. And on our website, revcom.us, you can find this collection of articles, including the article from which we took the beginning of today's show and illustrated just the first few paragraphs. Racism can be ended, but not under this system. And there's correspondences from prisoners about that article. All of this is a treasure, a trove of understanding about why all these reforms, whether they come from good intentions or they come from people who are looking to get in on the system and become politicians and all this other kind of stuff that will just keep the people oppressed, all of whatever, you have to get into this understanding. And so I think it is a very important thing that your statement and that we today are talking about. If you want to end this kind of wanton police murder, you need to overthrow this system through an actual revolution. And in addition to getting into Bob Avakian on why we need an actual revolution, why only revolution can solve this problem of this wanton police murder, as well as mass incarceration, brutality towards all of our youth, there's a solution to all of this that's concentrated in this Constitution for a new socialist republic. And when we have a system that's its foundation, its economic foundation, is proceeding from the needs of the people, both to live a decent life, but also to be able to thrive and be part of a struggle to emancipate all humanity. You need a radically different security force with a whole different set of aims and objectives to get to the point in a society in the future where there is no more exploitation or oppression, and where you don't need such a security force. So this is a subject, Noche, of another discussion, which we really should have soon, because this isn't going away, which is why we need a revolution and what we're preparing for. What I'd like to do to close this segment is to show the end of your statement, because you really put forward a forceful call for people to get involved in the movement for revolution. So I want to thank you for being on the show and for making that statement, and you're going to come back.
That's right.
All right.
We who follow Bob Avakian this year are determined to put an actual revolution on the map in this country, where people no longer go along with all the BS dead ends that keep us trapped in the same old system, fighting for crumbs and promises that never deal with the problem. And we are determined to build a force in this country that is preparing millions and that is acting today to stand up to these outrages, to defend people who are coming under attack by the violent enforcers of this system and the fascist thugs who want to make it even worse. All as part of preparing and building up the strength to make a revolution in these times where it is so clear they have nothing good for the masses of people, no future for humanity. But we have a future in fighting to make revolution, nothing less. And you, as you're out there righteously rebelling against this, need to look seriously at what it's going to take to end it and become part of the force that is determined to do that right here in this belly of the beast.
In the last couple of years, Republican fascists have launched a nationwide assault on the right of students to learn the true history of this country. They aim to force teachers to teach a false version of American history, where the foundational role of slavery and genocide is erased or whitewashed, and the big lie of American greatness is shoved down everyone's throats. The state of Florida and the fascist governor there, Ron DeSantis, have been on the front lines of this, most recently announcing a ban on advanced placement African American studies classes in high school. Just yesterday, the College Board, which is preparing the classes, announced a revised curriculum, which purges the name of a number of Black writers and scholars and downgrades topics like affirmative action and Black Lives Matter. Our correspondent Rafael Kadaris has been covering this on the RNL show. He begins this week by exposing just some of the bloody history of the state of Florida, history that fascists like Ron DeSantis are trying to suppress.
Did you know that before Florida became a state, it was a refuge for escaped slaves? Although the Spanish who colonized Florida brutally conquered the native peoples through war and disease, they did abolish slavery there in 1693. So as cotton plantations and the slave system expanded in the U.S., Florida actually became a safe haven for runaways who crossed the border and lived among the Seminole Indians. Hundreds of escaped slaves and Seminoles even occupied an abandoned fort, armed themselves, and provided protection for a whole community of free people. Many more fugitives from around the U.S. came to settle there. To the slave masters and white supremacists ruling the U.S., even the mere existence of what they called the Negro Fort was intolerable. In 1816, the genocidal slave owner, Andrew Jackson, who was already known for killing and removing Indians and would later be responsible for the deadly Trail of Tears, led a military assault on the fort, completely destroying it and massacring 270 men, women, and children. Fast forward to 1923, 100 years ago, a mob of 1,500 white people in Florida spent 7 days killing, raping, and burning the entire African-American town of Rosewood to the ground.
In 1923, the black town of Rosewood was a land of opportunity.
You've been drifting long, Mr. Man.
Seemed like forever.
Colored folks own all the land around here, all the businesses too. Man can make a new start around here, make something of himself.
Until the day, one woman's false accusation.
Tell me the truth. Was it truly a colored done this to you?
Unleashed a fury against their town.
If you find him, well, you know what to do.
There'd be some trouble around here, sir. To show you your help.
There ain't no way in the world one man got enough bullets for all them crackers.
And a search for the guilty became a hunt for the innocent.
These are real folks dying. Women and children ain't done nothing wrong to no soul.
Now, colored folk just can't be running all the time. There comes a time when you got to stand up and defend your rights.
Minnie Lee Langley was only a child when she became a refugee. Now, she's a great-grandmother. At her home in Jacksonville, Florida, we talked to her about the place where she was born, Rosewood, Florida, the place that haunts her memory.
I know they killed my aunt, and they killed my granddaddy. Made my granddaddy dug his hole. He didn't have but one arm, but they made him dug his own grave. And he prayed, and they shot him backwards in the grave.
At Rosewood?
At Rosewood.
In his new article on Revcom.us, America, truly a model of depraved racist genocide, how can any decent person deny that we need a revolution to overthrow this system? Bob Avakian makes this profound point. Think about what this means. For nearly 100 years, not only were thousands of black people lynched, but at many of these lynchings, there were mass gatherings of white people in a picnic and celebratory atmosphere. And then when the bodies were hung and often burned, many of these white people would go and cut off body parts of the person who'd been lynched as souvenirs in a carnival atmosphere. He then goes on to write, and that's not all. Photographs were taken and postcards were made and sold all over the country. Postcards of the lynchings. Think about what this says. In terms of depravity, you can't find anything Hitler and the Nazis did that was worse than this. You had the Nazi Dr. Mengele, who went to the concentration camps and performed grotesque experiments on the bodies of Jews who were imprisoned there. And that's horrible. That's part of one of the worst atrocities in the history of humanity. The whole Holocaust, the systematic slaughter of millions of Jews by the Nazis. But again, In terms of depravity, even after slavery, what was going on for nearly 100 years in this country is no less horrific. It belongs in the same category with the Nazi atrocities. While all the time we're being told this is the greatest country in the world. This is the leader of the free world. This is an inspiration to people all over the world. This is the history and reality of this country. And no, it's not ancient and irrelevant history either. It's the history they are still trying to whitewash and rewrite in order to perpetuate white supremacy and carry out more crimes against black people and other people of color. Just look at the modern day Nazis in the Republican Party and their efforts to ban so-called critical race theory, and really any education which teaches people about the real history and reality of racial oppression, and to replace it with patriotic education about the special greatness of America. In other words, lies. We've been covering this on the RNL show.
In recent months, fascist media and politicians and a growing movement of fascist parents and others have been waging an escalating assault on what gets taught in the schools. They say they're going after critical race theory, an academic theory that originated in law schools to look at the relationship between race and the law. But really, they're using critical race theory as a catch-all buzzword to attack and shut down any honest discussion of the real history of this country and systemic racism.
School curricula have changed completely and become explicitly political and openly racist. And a curriculum that teaches their kids to hate their country.
Critical race theory is racism, pure and simple. And it should be rejected by every American of every race.
And let me tell you right now, critical race theory is bigoted, it is a lie, and it is every bit as racist as the Klansmen in white sheets.
You know, there's already 20 states that drafted legislation to dictate, what can and can't be taught in schools, and specifically to dictate that teachers teach lies to the students. 6 states have already passed these laws, and these laws have language in them that say things like, you can't teach about the history of slavery in any way other than to say that it was a deviation from America's foundational principles. And we just have to say this completely flies in the face of the actual reality of this country. The first quote that Bob Avakian says in his book Basics is, "There would be no United States as we now know it today without slavery. That is a simple and basic truth." And this is exactly the simple and basic truth that these fascists want to outlaw. Since that segment aired over a year ago, the fascist assault on truth and education has escalated. At least 500 measures to ban the teaching of critical race theory have been proposed, passed, or adopted in 49 states. Ron DeSantis and the state of Florida have been leading the charge.
Critics call it the Don't Say Gay bill. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis has signed it into law. The new law states that classroom instruction on sexual orientation or gender identity may not occur in kindergarten through 3rd grade.
Tonight, some Tampa Bay teachers say they are being forced to remove all books from their classrooms to comply with a controversial new state law.
And that they're having to pack up their books. Some teachers, like this one, even covering them up, saying they fear being prosecuted. Having unvetted books or books that aren't allowed could result in a felony charge.
You can't teach that the foundations of our country were somehow evil. And we're not going to tell other kids that they're oppressed based on their race.
We want education, not indoctrination. If you fall on the side of indoctrination, we're going to decline. If it's education, then we will do.
Listen to what Bob Avakian says in his recent interviews about this fascist moron.
Now you see some of these fascists openly saying, well, slavery wasn't really that bad. Some of the conditions of the slave improved from how they were living in Africa. I mean, just horrific stuff like this. And I see Ron DeSantis, the governor of Florida, made a statement where he said,
it was the American Revolution that caused people to question slavery. No one had questioned it before we decided as Americans that we are endowed by our Creator with unalienable rights and that we are all created equal.
Well, this is just absolute bullshit, including, as I pointed out before, I think some of the slaves at least were questioning slavery before the Declaration of Independence was written, including in the uprisings of slaves, even during the colonial days before the country was founded.
Most recently, Ron DeSantis in the state of Florida banned an advanced placement course in African American studies.
Florida Governor Ron DeSantis is defending his administration's decision to block a course on African American studies from the state's public schools.
Now keep in mind, this AP class was prepared by the College Board, which is not a radical institution, and is already being taught in schools around the country. The College Board describes it as a multidisciplinary study of the African American diaspora that includes literature, the arts, science, politics, and geography. And yet DeSantis' Department of Education banned the course on the grounds that it violates Florida law and lacks educational value. Comedian D.L. Hughley was one of many people to call this shit out. He tweeted, "Ron DeSantis has banned African American history, saying it lacks educational value. Let me get this straight. It was illegal for slaves to learn, and now it's illegal to learn about slaves." Think about the insult on top of injury for this country to kidnap, enslave, rape, and torture black people for hundreds of years, and then to say that their history and culture has no educational value. All this as part of imposing a white supremacist brainwash and training a whole generation to be foot soldiers for a white Christian fascist America. Students and teachers have been speaking out against this.
What's your reaction to this AP African American Studies ban?
It's keeping African Americans silenced.
In my opinion, that it was targeted and I couldn't learn about my own history.
I think it just symbolizes like blatant racism.
Marvin Dunn, a professor emeritus at Florida University, is defying the ban on AP African American Studies by leading high school students on Teach the Truth tours, stopping at sites of the worst white supremacist violence in the history of Florida, including Rosewood. Much more of this is needed in the face of this fascist assault on education. As we said last year on the RNL show, this is something that needs to be boomeranged back on these fascists. People need to go and seek out even more truth about the nature of this country in the face of this. You know, everyone, parents, students, people in society need to come to the defense of these teachers who are under attack. There needs to be massive defiance of these laws. It doesn't have to go down that this creates just a chill in society, right? This is something that can be, turned into massive resistance, and it needs to urgently. At the same time, people urgently need to pursue the truth that they are learning about this country. That this is a country founded on slavery and genocide, but take it further to what is the actual system, the capitalist system that has been at the foundation and that has been driving this racial oppression all the way up to the present. And they need to learn about the radical alternative to this. Bob Avakian has drafted a whole different constitution, with a radically different socialist economic system, a whole different political system, legal system, and yes, an educational system that actually tells people the truth and teaches, young people to be critical thinkers, right? So we're going to be out fighting for this revolution, bringing this understanding to people, and we need to unite with as many people to defeat these fascists as part of doing that.
In light of the responses to laws being passed across the country over whether or not the teaching of the actual history of this country, in particular the history of racist oppression, will be allowed to be taught to a generation of youth, we have produced a short video of Bob Avakian's recent article called Racism: Why Kids Need to Learn About It.
Racism. White kids need to learn about it.
Allow teachers to teach the truth.
A dozen Republican-led states seeking to ban or limit how the role of slavery and the pervasive effects of racism can be taught.
We're teaching people that our country is a horrible place. It's a racist place.
We have reached the book burning stage.
We are eradicating this bad stuff. Burn them.
Today, fascist politicians, parent groups, and other fascist lunatics are waging a vicious campaign to ban books and in other ways keep kids and people generally, from learning even some of the basic truth about this country, its actual history, and its present reality. One of the main lines of attack of these fascists is the claim that learning about white supremacy and racism will make children, that is, white children, feel bad.
We can and should teach this history without labeling a young child as an oppressor or requiring he or she feel guilt or shame.
Well, as a white youth growing up in the 1950s and early 1960s, when I learned about white supremacy and racism, it did make me feel bad. And that was a very good thing. It made me feel outraged. And yes, it made me feel ashamed. And that made me want to do something, to be part of fighting against this white supremacy and racism. And I was not alone in this. This was the experience of huge numbers, millions of white youth who came of age in that period, who were inspired by the civil rights movement and then by the more militant Black liberation movement, and became part of the revolutionary upsurge of the 1960s. These fascists are determined not to let something like that happen again in these highly charged times.
Poisoning the minds of our youth at school, turning some of them into revolutionaries in the streets.
And instead, they are setting out to mold a bunch of mindless white youth into rabid racists, similar to the Hitler Youth in Germany during the rise of the Nazi fascists there in the 1930s. Shutting down these fascists in their attempts to suppress the truth about this country is a crucial part of defeating this fascism overall. And this, in turn, can be and must be part of getting rid of this whole system of capitalism imperialism, which has bred this fascism, which has white supremacy built into its foundation and its ongoing functioning, which is the source of horrific oppression of literally billions of people here and throughout the world, and is a threat to the very existence of humanity through its escalating destruction of the environment and the continual danger of war between nuclear-armed capitalist imperialist powers, including the U.S., Russia, and China.
For our final segment today, we share an inspiring message and an urgent challenge being issued from inside the dungeons of Iran. Do not be afraid of jail. Be afraid of living and being indifferent. These words were reportedly issued from inside prison in Iran, sent as a challenge to the outside world. As the International Emergency Committee to Free Iran's Political Prisoners now has recently written, this quote captures the spirit of many political prisoners in Iran. Millions in Iran who rose up in recent months against the Islamic Republic have shown incredible courage. Some carry homemade protest signs that read, "A death with dignity is better than a life lived in humiliation." This spirit has also stood out in recent months among the women political prisoners in the notoriously brutal Evin prison in Iran's capital of Tehran. They set an example of fearlessness under extreme conditions from behind the prison walls. They have gone on hunger strikes and sit-ins. They've issued group appeals, sung protest songs to send out to the world outside the prisons, and they staged prison theater to call for a stop to the attacks on students and for the fall 2022 uprising to continue. And they have done all this in the face of daily brutality, including extended solitary confinement and threats of beatings or rape. They come from different walks of life and from a broad spectrum of political, religious, and ideological viewpoints so that their actions may embolden the struggles outside the prison walls for justice, radical change, and a much better world. So here I want to read part of a statement that was issued by 30 women in Evin prison just a few days ago on January 22nd. Among those who issued this statement were the writer Sepideh Golian, women's rights activist and German-Iranian citizen Nahid Tagavi, and environmentalists Nilufar Bayani and Sepideh Kashani. Quote, "We, the political and ideological prisoners of the women's ward of Evin prison, demand an end to the execution of protesters and an end to unjust sentences of prisoners in Iran. We have all been sentenced to a total of 124 years in prison through unfair and untransparent procedures, which is worth a few generations of human life." End quote. Finally, we share an incredible recording that was made by Ghazal Abdullahi while she was speaking to her mother, the journalist Aliyeh Motalabzadeh, as well as the human rights activist Narges Mohammadi, both of whom were locked inside Evin prison. In a moment, you will hear those two women's courageous voices, along with other women political prisoners, as they join together to sing the internationally famous anti-fascist anthem, Bella Ciao, in Farsi. And we will accompany this recording with some of the faces of the women political prisoners who signed the letter I quoted from a moment ago, as well as images of the beautiful recent uprising in Iran. As Abdullahi wrote when she posted this recording on Instagram, "Listen to their voices and feel their hope. They are singing for you." Indeed, what shines through in these recordings is these women's joy, their yearning for life and freedom, and their desire to impart that spirit to the world outside the ugly walls that surround them. The people of the world, all of us with a conscience, must stand with, defend, and fight to free these political prisoners.
اینو گوش کنیم. یک دو سه. خاک این گندم تو خیابونه خوشه خشم من و تو تشنه بارونه حق ما کم نیست زانوی غم نیست قلب ما که دور از هم نیست دنیا گرانه این یه آماده خطر تار و یامانه با هم یا همه تنها بلا چاو بلا چاو بلا چاو 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 میبریم از خواهد یه شب مهتاب آن بیداری میشکنه ما دستای ما یا همه با هم یا همه تنها بلا چاو بلا چاو بلا چاو 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 میبریم از خواب یه شب مهتاب ما که بیداریم تا فردا آخر سنگین ظلم عالمگیر میشکنه ما دستای ما بند فنان پیام هدف کل نظام بند فنان زندان اوین تقدیم به همه.
Sunsara, it was very important that we played that segment. It was inspiring, and it does remind us here on the show, everybody working on the show, people in the room here, and it should remind all of you that their struggle is our struggle, that this is a show, and this is about a revolution for the emancipation of humanity all over the world. We say, in accord with what Bob Avakian put forward, internationalism, the whole world comes first. So right now we're at the end of our 133rd episode, and it's been a very heavy week, but it also is a week that fills us with determination. So Sunsara, you want to give some parting words to our audience and some instructions too?
Yes, I do. Yes, I do. Listen, everybody watching, you have a role to play in spreading this show and spreading the revolution as you learn more about it, connecting others to it in one of the most crucial ways. And we're going to be talking a lot more about this in the coming weeks and months. One of the most crucial ways to support the Revolution Nothing Less show and strengthen it and enable us to do what we're doing and get it out further is for you to become a Patreon. That means you make a monthly donation to keep this show going. $3 a month, $15 a month, $100 a month. Give what you can, but become part of the network and community supporting this show. And we have been remiss on the show. We've been talking about this with the team. We have not fully taken advantage of and shared with and forged our Patreon community. So to everybody who's already a Patreon, we thank you, we appreciate you, we depend on you. And we're going to do two things we want to let you know about for our Patreons and to encourage everybody watching to become a Patreon if you aren't yet. We're going to start releasing segments early. We don't know if we'll do it every week yet, but this week we have a special segment that we're going to release on Monday for Patreons only. That'll be part of our show next week about a protest action, a creative artistic action that some of the RevComs here did, taking on the warmongering around Ukraine from the U.S. At a Pussy Riot event. It's very interesting. You'll get early release to that. And then in late February, we're going to have a Patreon only by invite Zoom live with Andy, myself, or other members of the team. We're going to start doing that more regularly. So that'll be a thank you and a way of forging community, but also it should entice many of you to sign up now and become supporters of the show.
So with that, we're going to say goodnight for this, the 133rd episode of the Revolution Nothing Less show. And we will see you next week at 5 p.m. Pacific time, 7 p.m. Central time, and 8 p.m. Eastern time. So on behalf of the entire crew here, we want to say goodnight. Good night, Sunsara.